is really just to get you all familiar with the case presentation that we use within ECHO, which is going to look a little different from the presentation that is given today. Again, we really appreciate Darren and Crystal and the team in Spokane in stepping up to do the first case presentation. It'll look a little bit different from what I'm describing here, but we wanted to start things off with, presenting a case and really doing the full ECHO model for our first time. All right, so let's see. I guess I get to advance my own screen. So, well, first of all, I want to just thank Sarah because Sarah is really the person who brought ECHO to Washington State, launching her CBTP ECHO Learning Collaborative. I know some of you have actually participated in that Learning Collaborative, and so you're familiar with the approach, but we were super excited. We actually started it with our first episode, Psychosis New Journeys teams, starting in early 2018, and now we're so excited to finally launch our PACT ECHO Clinic going forward. So thank you, Sarah, for leading the charge here. All right, so let's talk a little bit about case presentation. And I want to start this off by just, observing the fact that, like, we know that this can be kind of frightening, that this is not something that we typically do on routine with each other. It can feel a little bit like you're on the spot as far as, presenting the client and what you've tried, what you haven't tried. And I think we all want to sort of come into this with the notion of, guess what? The reason that you're presenting this case is often because you need help, and that's okay. That's sort of the premise sort of underlying this. I think the other important thing for you all to recognize is that we are a learning community and we are all learning from each other, okay? And so not only are you presenting a case to sort of learn, you can be sure that other people are learning because you just presented on someone who represents something very similar that they're struggling with within their team. We like to think about kind of three main purposes, and I could probably come up with more, but I think the crux of it in terms of the purpose for a case presentation is, one, to just give us enough context in order for you to receive good case consultation. If we don't have all the information about the client, it's really hard for us to provide any thoughtful recommendations. They'll be faulty from the get-go if we don't have that, information about the person across a wide range of their experience, symptoms, history, those kinds of things. We also want to learn from each other, as I mentioned earlier. And I think the other piece is sort of this networking and sharing of our work with clients and with the rest of you, both within your team, so giving you the opportunity as a team to sort of go through this exercise together and presenting a case and sort of drilling down in maybe ways you haven't yet, to then lead to sort of, okay, what are our core questions about this client so we can better serve them? I think from our perspective too, we are likely going to identify areas for future training and consultation just based on some of the things that you all might identify that you're having difficulty with or have questions about. And so we really see this as an iterative process. The case presentations and the complexities are going to help us to really elucidate and get a better sense of, boy, we should really focus more training in this particular area. So we might have a didactic focus on a common thing that you identify within your case presentations. And then lastly, I just wanted to share that we want to set you up for success, and that's the reason that we're doing this didactic today, is to help prepare you for giving a successful case presentation so that you can get the most out of this process. And ultimately, it comes down to better serving the people that you serve, right? And so what better way to do that than to sort of weigh in on people who are doing this work across the state, weighing in on various types of expertise. By the way, we will be bringing in more representatives of our hub team to represent the full multidisciplinary team. We'll also be bringing in representatives for our future didactics that represent some of those areas. So for example, a prescriber that represents sort of current directions on psychopharmacology, or a nurse that talks about, preventing cardiovascular disease and what the whole team can do around that. So we're really excited for this to be the first step in that, but recognizing that, again, we're really wanting to sort of provide expertise to the whole team. So here are the basics, here are the nuts and bolts of the case presentation. So each of you will then do at least one case presentation over the next year. Again, this is somewhat dependent on how many of you routinely do the Echo Clinic model to know, is it 2? Is it only 1? So we're going to see, but we know at least there will be 1 over the next year. What you'll do is submit the case presentation materials, which I'm about to go over, to our PACT Echo Clinic email address, preferably by the Monday before your presentation. And the reason for that is that we really take your consultation questions seriously. And so in order to really provide you with the most resources possible, we need time to do our homework. And so if we get them a little later in the process, it's harder for us. Some of the things are going to be at our fingertips. Some of them are things that we really need to sort through and even talk amongst ourselves to really provide a good, strong set of recommendations to you all. So here are just the nuts and bolts of the case presentation materials, and I'll talk about each of these in greater detail in a moment. So one is that case presentation form, which you saw that the Frontier Behavioral Health PACT team sent on. Second is the integrated summary of assessment, and that is based on the PACT comprehensive assessment. So I'll talk about those components in a minute. And the third is the PIT, or the putting it together sort of case formulation. So these are all, with the exception of the case presentation form, they're grounded in what we see as sort of core or routine PACT processes. And they're also things that many of your teams are still developing or incorporating into routine practice. And so we're in some ways providing an opportunity to be successful in those processes by incorporating them into this process itself. And also trying not to duplicate processes where we have you develop a whole separate, form that is really sort of, duplicative of your integrated summary and putting it together process. So as you think about doing your case presentations, you want to consider who on the team would be best to take the lead on presenting. It is nice because of the size of the teams to not have everybody or not knowing who's going to say what. So it is helpful to kind of have a lead. It might be the primary for that client or the person that is seeing the client the most. But as you talk about the different interventions that have been delivered to that client and frame that up, it's helpful to hear from other team members as well to clarify kind of what they've been doing too. So don't be shy about sharing sort of what your experience of the client has been, especially around specific interventions and treatment response. And then a succinct, streamlined presentation is going to take about 15 minutes, and I'll walk you through kind of the different components of that in a minute as well. All right, so let's first talk about the main components of the case presentation form. Here's sort of a look at it at a glance, and Darren sent us a completed one from their team that they'll be talking about today. So one is we, other than the agency and the client alias, we lead with the primary consultation questions, and that's helpful to present first. I'll share in a minute sort of the order of things we like in terms of the actual presentation itself. But it's nice because I think it leads into everything else. So for everybody to hear the consultation questions, even if as you're reading it, it's just helpful to then read through the rest of the information with those consultation questions in mind to be able to kind of refer back to and think about, okay, what is it about what I'm reading about this client and understanding about this client that leads us to helping this team with their primary consultation questions. We'd prefer you limit those to 3, but it's really 1 to 3. I think we've got kind of one big consultation question for today. More than that, it gets hard to do within the time frame that we've got. You'll also identify current or anticipated challenges in treatment, and our sense is that those sort of lend themselves to better understanding the primary consultation questions. Current medications they're on, that includes dosage and frequency. Attaching the integrated summary and the putting it together, which are those separate attachments that are part of the comprehensive assessment process within PACT, and then a list of the interventions used and response to treatment. And those can just be categories. So we give an example around, I think it's supported employment is our example, supported employment and education. But it's really important for us to not only see sort of the category of intervention, but also what was the client's response to that intervention, like how well has it been, has it taken off, or have there been struggles around implementation and that kind of thing. Again, that helps us to better frame up our recommendations to you all. Okay, so that's the case presentation form. That's the first piece. The second then is the integrated summary of assessment. I'm hoping this slide looks familiar to most, if not all of you. However, next month, actually, Jeff is going to cover the PACT comprehensive assessment, as well as some tweaks that we've made to it. But the gist of it is that this is all sort of hinging on or comes from the PACT comprehensive assessment process, where each of you are contributing assessment information and essentially data within each of your specialty areas across those 7 domains I have listed there, and then putting it into an integrated summary. And so you can see, hopefully this looks familiar to you all. We'll make sure that you get a copy of it if it doesn't. After today's call, so that you can see the Robert case example, which shows an example of his integrated summary and how that leads to the development of the treatment plan and the weekly client schedule. But essentially, for each of those domains, then the summary of information about that domain is all in one place. So what we're trying to avoid is separate assessments across domains that sort of sit in a chart that aren't integrated in any way, and knowing that whatever in those subheadings is based on not only who took the lead in the assessment and their interview and look at other data sources, but it's also based on their further discussion with other team members. So for example, their substance use is also better understood under the context of maybe the mental health assessment, and they may understanding sort of how their use might be affected by their symptoms, psychiatric symptoms, or vice versa. Okay, so that's the integrated summary. And so we know that, is likely lives somewhere in whether it's your EHR or your chart. For some of you, you may be presenting on a client that doesn't have this completed yet. Again, the idea is that everybody will eventually have an integrated a comprehensive assessment and integrated summary of assessment completed, no matter where they are in their stage of treatment, with the understanding that this is, in many cases, sort of the first time that you may all have embarked on that process with the client to better understand where they're coming from. All right, and then lastly is that putting it together worksheet. And I'm not going to go into this one in great detail today because Jeff is also going to talk next month about some tweaks that we've made to it. But essentially, this is sort of your case formulation and your understanding where you're pulling then all of the information from the integrated summary into sort of a more easy sort of one-page snapshot of the client, based on not only your assessment, but also conversation and, further development with the client themselves. And so specifying, areas such as their goals and perpetuating and protective factors, strengths, those kinds of things, as well as then what does that mean in terms of the team's idea of what kinds of interventions that they would be getting. Again, it's not the treatment plan. This is really just setting the stage for the treatment plan. And then how does their stage of treatment sort of tie into, the kind of treatment that you would be delivering to them. So those are the 3 components. It's that case presentation form, which is just a summary document that just gives us a little bit of a sense of some things that are important, including the consultation questions, the integrated summary of assessment, which is based on the PACT comprehensive assessment, and the PIT, the putting it together case formulation. All right, so now I want to talk a little bit, just briefly, because I know we're running out of time, on the format of the case presentation. Did we send that out? I think we did beforehand. It's a snapshot, basically. We'll talk about it later because I can't remember. But basically what you'll be getting is just sort of an overview of how to present the case. And this is something you do not have to send to us. In fact, there's so much information that you'll be sending to us anyway that we suggest you just keep it to yourselves. But it's a way of organizing your presentation about the client so that you're not going through the integrated summary and the PIT, which could take us, an hour, but rather we're sort of putting it into a format that fits within a 15-minute window. And so the first around 2 minutes is sort of explaining the reason for the presentation. Why did you select this case? Does it, present unique challenge or an unusual problem? Does it, maybe it's an illustration of something you did well. and you want to present that to, you know, sort of help with everyone else's learning, that's okay too. But again, we're leading with those consultation questions at the front end. Then another 3 minutes on background in terms of client demographics and clinical presentation, as well as relevant historical background and psychiatric history, which is about 3 to 5 minutes. Now, recognizing the admission criteria for PACT, we know that just talking about hospitalization or service utilization itself could take a really long time. What we're most interested in here is what kind of information helps us to better understand the consultation questions and helps us to understand the client. We know that all of your clients have had high service utilization, so you do not need to go back through and document all of the hospitalizations or all the times they went to jail or whatever it is, but rather what's most relevant. Maybe it's the most recent one, and that there was some specific information about that recent relapse that's important for us to know, that then helps to guide the consultation questions. Similarly, sort of presenting significant adverse experiences or traumas, family history, and any other relevant treatment history. The formulation based on the putting it together worksheet. So again, this is sort of a snapshot using the PIT to describe your understanding of why things are the way they are, and really using that, that format as your guide. And again, especially if it's a new client or you're still getting to know them, because engagement has been an issue, it's okay if you're not sure about some things and you're still gathering some of that information. That's okay too. Some of our recommendations may be focused on drilling down on that kind of information because you don't have it yet. And then lastly, the interventions and plans. And this is really just a description of what you've done so far, what you plan to do, what are the treatment targets, are there current or anticipated, you know, challenges in treatment, that kind of thing. Again, when you look at the case presentation form, there is that summary of interventions in response to treatment. Just summarizing that up is totally fine. You'll see for today's case presentation, they did include their treatment plan, some specifics from the treatment plan, and that's fine too. But I think, again, we want to make sure that you know, you're using tools that are already there at the ready for yourselves, and that you're not having to duplicate resources. And again, this is just a summary of that within a 3-minute window. So all in all, that should be taken about 15 minutes, and then we'll have an additional 15 minutes around clarifying questions and recommendations. All right, so I'm thinking, I don't know, should I do this part given the time? Okay, so we'll figure out how to get these videos to you, because I'm thinking, just in the interest of time, basically we just show you some examples of like the best, you know, the correct way and incorrect way of conducting a case presentation. But let's sort of set that aside. We're not going to use our time here because I want to make sure we have enough time to hear about the client being presented and provide those recommendations. So I will stop there. Thank you so